Okay, good afternoon and welcome to today's Knowledge by the Slice, a roundtable discussion examining democratic backsliding, executive power, and constitutional governing in South Korea. I'm Hyunjun Park, Korea Foundation Professor of Sociology and Director of the James Joo-Jin Kim Center for Korean Studies, and I'll be your moderator today. Penn Arts and Science sponsored the Knowledge by the Slice lunchtime series to give the community a chance to hear from some of the school's outstanding faculty members. Today's event is generously supported by the Adolph and Felicia Leon Fund and co-hosted by Penn Arts and Science, the James Joo-Jin Kim Center for Korean Studies, and Perry Ward House. On December 3rd last year, in a surprising move, President Yoon of South Korea declared emergency martial law, which was revoked 6 hours later after lawmakers blocked the orders with the parliament vote. Along with indictment of the president on insurrection charges, the Constitutional Court in South Korea has been conducting the impeachment trial. It is expected to deliver its verdict in the impeachment trial of the President Yoon very soon. Today's panel, which consists of 3 Penn faculty members in political science and law, start with some background and context leading to this political turmoil in South Korea. Then it delves into how the political crisis there could be understood in relation to the global trends of a democratic backsliding and consolidation of executive power. Our panel will conclude with some thought about the future of constitutional governing and implication for the relationship between South Korea and the United States. Today, I'm pleased to welcome a group of experts with a unique perspective on democracy in South Korea and beyond. Our first panelist, Susan Yu, is a senior fellow in the Department of Political Science, specializing in comparative politics with an emphasis on gender, politics, and political behavior, with regional expertise in South Korea. She is currently working on a book project that examines the relationship between demographic policies and women's empowerment. The book investigates the emergence of government policies on having children and how they have evolved as South Korea transitioned from autocracy to the democracy in the past few decades. Our second panelist, Jane Asberg, is Assistant Professor of Political Science and a faculty affiliate at the Center for Latin American and Latinx Studies. Her research used text and statistical analysis to better understand authoritarian repression and censorship. Our last but not least panelist, William Burke White, is the Richard Petty Professor and Professor of Law and co-faculty lead for the Global Order, Power, Technology, and Governance Research theme here at Perry Ward House. William is an expert on international law and global governance and served in the Obama administration from 2009 to 2011 on Secretary Clinton's political planning staff. His current research explores gap in the global governance system and the challenge of international legal regulations in a world of rising powers and divergent interests. Following this presentation of our 3 panelists, we should have plenty of time for your questions. I hope you enjoyed the discussions and the pizzas that you're having now. And now let's all welcome our panelists.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here today. Sorry, I'm a little bit sick, so I'm going to keep the mask on. But thank you for being here. I think I was invited to talk about kind of the political developments and just to give you a little bit of a background regarding the series of events that unfolded. And really, I think the emergency martial law, which was declared at the night of December 3rd, 2024, really set shockwaves across the whole country and, of course, to overseas, including myself, as really no one had predicted this to happen in South Korean democracy today. So at the night of December 3rd, Yoon Suk-yeol, then president, declared emergency martial law. And soon after, armed troops were deployed to the National Assembly building and were ordered to block all lawmakers from entering. So very fortunately, the politicians responded very swiftly. The main opposition party, the Democratic Party, denounced Yoon's move as unconstitutional, And this voice was joined by even the leader of the Yoon's conservative ruling People Power Party, Han Dong-hoon, and many other lawmakers in both of these main parties, as well as the smaller opposition party as well. So within less than 3 hours, lawmakers were able to convene in the National Assembly and voted unanimously to revoke the martial law. And they all criticized the illegality and unconstitutionality of the martial law declaration. And within about 6 hours, the martial law was officially lifted. And so that was kind of a good news that happened that night, despite the very shock that this caused. However, while politicians and citizens were quite united on lifting the martial law, South Korea has experienced various political challenges since the uplifting of the martial law. So the first challenge was, I think many of you might recall, was National Assembly's vote in impeaching Yoon Suk-yeol. So in order for the impeachment motion to pass, the National Assembly required at least 2/3 votes to agree. And that required some members of the ruling party, the People Power Party, or PPP, to vote against their party line, which officially stated that they should take a stance for Yoon Suk-yeol and not impeach him. Right. So, however, on December 14th, the National Assembly voted to impeach Yoon, and that was kind of the second vote that they had to make, as during the first vote, the lawmakers from the ruling party walked out. And I know a lot of pundits call that kind of the walk of shame, as they walked out of the National Assembly without casting their vote, right? And later on January 26th, Yoon Suk-yeol was arrested for charges of insurrection after he had resisted being taken for days. And finally, after clashes between his security detail and police, he was arrested. But after 52 days in custody, he was released and is now awaiting court ruling for this impeachment. So I'm sure many of you thought that we would have the Constitutional Court ruling by now. I think initially we were expecting the rule to come out about last week, and so I was hoping that we would be able to kind of share what happened today. But unfortunately, at this moment, we're still awaiting Constitutional Court's ruling on the impeachment. So this will require at least 6 of the current 8 Constitutional Court justices to vote in favor of the impeachment. And I just saw that not only has it been delayed, it was supposed to kind of, well, it was expected to be made, the decision was expected to be made this month, but there are reports now saying that it might be delayed even to next month. So we'll have to see how the events unfold. And another challenge that we're facing right now is that one of the court justices is set to resign in April. And so the expectation is that the ruling will be made before then, but in the case that that doesn't happen, that will be a serious challenge, as one of the 9 seats is currently vacant as well. So, and I think one of the important things to note about what's happened are the protests that have taken place in South Korea. So as soon as Yoon Suk-yeol declared martial law, the South Korean citizens actually came to and convened in the National Assembly building in order to make sure that the lawmakers were able to get inside the building. And so that was kind of a remarkable moment, and many people kind of saw that as a sign of South Korea's Korean democratic resiliency. And even after that, as the lawmakers were kind of voting on the impeachment, again, the citizens made sure to kind of convene in front of the National Assembly so that they would kind of be able to impeach Yoon rather than follow the party lines. And so I think the protests were extremely important in this, as they were in South Korean democracy, or the history of democracy. But another kind of important aspect of this, I think, is that it has also been very polarized, and increasingly so since the Parliament or the National Assembly voted for Yoon's impeachment. And so why don't we talk about this more in the Q&A, but I think these kinds of the polarization on one hand and the protests on the other both speak to both the resilience of democracy, but the current tensions and the threat that we're under, and the difficulty in kind of ensuring that democratic practices are kept alive. So I think, why don't I stop here for now, and then we can kind of come back to kind of the details, depending on where the conversation takes us.
Great, I guess it's my turn. So I'm here to give some context about how the South Korea crisis looks the same or different than other trends in democratic backsliding. This is a topic we've all heard about in the news and academia. And the answer is it's unusual in some ways and usual in others, which is a very academic answer, but I want to pull on two threads, right? One of what is unusual and the other on what is usual. So to start with what is unusual. So modern democratic backsliding usually doesn't look like calling martial law, directly trying to arrest or throw out your opposition. That still happens, but it usually happens in kind of conflict zones. It's much rarer these days to see the kind of outright attempt at government takeover that we saw by Yoon. And in many ways, this was really a throwback to the military coups of the Cold War, including South Korea's own coup. These are coups that happen quickly, they're formally declared, they really announce themselves. I do a lot of research on Chile, and in Chile, you know, the day that Pinochet took power, we all know that. It's September 11th, 1973. You can really point to it. Modern cases of democratic backsliding tend to take place a little more subtly and a little more gradually. So a person gets elected president, someone like Orban in Hungary or Bukele in El Salvador, and they start changing the rules to their benefit. So when they have a majority in Congress, they say, okay, well, I'll remove term limits. Or I'll make sure that the opposition that threatens me can't actually run because of some electoral rule or some trumped up criminal charge. I'll close or sue or revoke the licenses of opposition media. I'll make sure that I'm the sole source of information about what is happening in the country. And this was the pathway to Venezuela's current dictatorship. There's still strategies that Maduro uses. And importantly, with that strategy, there's no date where we know that the leader becomes a dictator. There's no one day that we point to Chavez becoming the dictator of Venezuela, and some still say he never was a dictator. So one of the reasons that the South Korean attempted coup made the news, one of the reasons that we're having this event, is that it happened in this very clear way. You knew that there was someone trying to take over the functions of the government. And what we see more in democratic backsliding in general today, particularly in the last 20 or so years, is a series of little actions that aren't necessarily going to make headlines. A judge gets replaced, like, what's the big deal? An opposition leader gets jailed for corruption, well, maybe he did it. A court gets ignored, who really knows what that means? And so these little actions don't trigger the same immediate wave of opposition. And if protests do happen, they're not gonna be quite as big. They're not gonna be as encompassing. And so all eyes won't actually be on the government in the same way. What is usual about South Korea is the popular support. Right, as Susan mentioned, we're now seeing these protests in support of Yoon, who was, we know, an aspiring autocrat. And I grew up in like George W. Bush's America. It was this claim that got made again and again and again that everybody wants democracy and you just have to free them from the tyranny. And then I lived with a family in Chile who were Pinochetistas. They were Pinochet supporters. They treated me incredibly kindly, but they also told me that everybody who died under the dictatorship was a terrorist. Most of these so-called terrorists were actually students or labor leaders or young people with ideals, an awful lot like our students at Penn. A very common quote about violence under Pinochet was that you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs. So this family that I lived with had a narrative, and that really couldn't be shaken, that Chile was heading to civil war or a communist dictatorship. And even though we now know that that was basically an invention, it was effectively an invention of the CIA as well as the military, it still remained that the choice for them was between chaos and stability. Political scientist Gary Cox makes the case that democracy is founded on all sides, but on the premise that all sides believe that rule by the other groups is tolerable, that everyone wants to improve citizens' lives. They just disagree about exactly how to get there. But for some, that's simply not true. And a lot of that is propaganda or elite-led political speech, especially in this modern information age where we have social media. So when Yoon made his statement calling for martial law, he called the opposition a den of criminals. And what that means is that their rule is intolerable. For aspiring autocrats, the other side is corrupt. The other side is going to let immigrants ruin the country. The other side is going to let gangs take over. The other side, as Orban claims, are Soros mercenaries. The other side is the root of all evil. And then if you have power in the media, you can spread that. If you can create an echo chamber, there's no opposing view, there's no mention of the aspiring autocrats' corruption, only the corruption of others. There will be no discussions of policy failures, only the symbolic successes. This is something that Bukele in El Salvador has been incredibly effective at. He has tabloids that serve him troll farms. At one point, the opposition made a hashtag dictator Bukele, and he responded with his own hashtag. What a pretty dictatorship, with a bunch of pictures of the military holding bags of rice, helping old women go up the hill, playing soccer with kids. And so in his tabloids, in his reality, the NGOs and journalists who oppose him, they're aiding the gangs. All the young men he picks up in these giant sweeps, these giant arrest waves, they're all gang members. And you can ignore what their mothers are saying. And if they deserve it, if they did something to call the attention of the government, well, then whatever happens to them must be fine. There's a term for this during Argentina's dictatorship in the 1970s and 1980s that it was commonly said, por algo será. They must have done something. So people are thrown out of planes while they're drugged, por algo será. They are taken from their families in the middle of the night, por algo será. Students are tortured, women are raped, bodies are dumped in mass graves, por algo será. So on the positive side in South Korea, we did see pushback from virtually all sectors, right? People went into the streets, the military refused to repress them, opposition leaders scaled walls to get into Congress, and Yoon's own party sanctioned him. There are ongoing fears about the state of democracy in South Korea, and especially as this popular support rises, but that solidarity is exactly how dictatorships and aspiring dictatorships end. When we think of Pinochet, we know he lost power because the military refused to obey orders of repression, and because of protests, and because of a broad coalition that supported democracy and believed that rule by the other side could be tolerable. So I'll end there.
Well, thanks, and let me start by thanking Arts and Sciences for making this possible, and Hyunjun and the Kim Center for coordinating it, and of course Perry Worldhouse for hosting us. This was my home for many years at Penn, and it's wonderful to be back. I'm going to offer some thoughts from the international legal perspective. And broadly speaking, I want to make 4 points. One about human rights, one about democratic governance, one about comparative martial law, and then finally a word about global geopolitics. So from the international human rights perspective, what happened is simply illegal. Particularly when, and I'm not a Korean law expert, but I have looked at the martial law order, and when I look at it, it clearly violates the rights of South Korean citizens to peaceful assembly, certain labor union rights, among others. The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights is the sort of most basic international law instrument on human rights. Article 19 gives everyone the right to hold opinions without interference, and the right to freedom of expression. Article 21 provides the right of peaceful assembly. Article 22, the right of freedom of association with others. And the assertion of martial law here involved prohibiting opposition parties from gathering in violation of freedom of assembly and association, and at least as applied, we could have violated the right to freedom of expression about opinions with respect to the Korean political situation. Now, international law does provide for what we call derogation. It means that in times of national emergency, countries are allowed to violate certain, but not all, human rights. There is a recognition that if your country is being invaded by a neighbor, maybe you do have to, for example, limit rights of freedom, of certain freedoms, detain people for longer than the normal maximum time of detention. And Article 4 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights lays out the framework for such derogation. Essentially, you can't derogate from some of the most important rights, and you have to make a public declaration of derogation. The logic here is a political logic, that if you force countries to explain why they're derogating, what rights they're derogating from, and for how long they're going to derogate, you put real pressure on them to come back into compliance as soon as the national emergency is over. Well, did Korea derogate? No, there was no formal derogation. Was there a national emergency that under international law could have given rise to such a derogation? In my view, no. The national emergency here was not an invasion. The national emergency here wasn't a horrific act of terrorism that led to hundreds of thousands of deaths on the streets. The national emergency here was, I don't like the opposition. Right? So under international law, there would not have been a right to derogate that might have facilitated or allowed the kinds of violations inherent in the martial law order. Next, I want to talk a little bit about democratic governance. There is not in international law an absolute right to democratic governance. Lots of countries choose different governance systems, and international law recognizes that. What there is a right to participate in government. And that right is not always respected, don't get me wrong, but things like the Syracuse principles on rights that limit military takeovers of civilian institutions are at stake in what we saw in South Korea. Article 21 of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, it says the will of the people shall be the basis of the authority of government, that elections must be genuine. Or the UN General Assembly's Resolution 55 from 2000, recognizing the ideal of democracy. Or the World Summit Outcome document from 2005 that reaffirms democracy as a fundamental principle. All of those seem to be left behind with this declaration. Now, you might say, is international law going to do anything about that? And my first answer is probably not. I say probably not because President Yoon, thankfully, did not do some of the things that many of the people who've been discussed here did do. He didn't torture and disappear his people like President Pinochet, General Pinochet did when he was running Chile. Thankfully, this only lasted 6 hours and we didn't see an ethnic cleansing or crimes against humanity. Had those occurred, it's possible that the International Criminal Court might have indicted President Yoon, as we just saw with the arrest of President Duterte from the Philippines for violations during his quote-unquote war on drugs. But what we saw in South Korea was nonetheless a violation. I just don't think any of the institutions of international law are going to do anything to President Yoon for it. There may be other consequences, and I'll come to those in a moment. But to get there, I wanted to take a trip through comparative context. And my basic point is to say that declarations of martial law never go well. I have yet to see what we might call successful declaration of martial law that strengthens democracy and human rights in a country. For those of you who know South Korea, think back to 1972 and 1980. Or if you'd rather think about the Philippines from 1972 to 1981. Poland from 1981 to 1983. Thailand in 2006 and again in 2014. Egypt in 2011 and 2013. Pakistan in 1958, 1969, 1977, and 1999. Or in Russia, at least in the Russian-occupied territories of Ukraine, today since 2022. Those are my examples of martial law. Did any of them end well? No. Now, international law doesn't forbid martial law, but again, it does impose this contextual element of a true national emergency. And even in that circumstance, those historic examples tell us that this is a bad strategy, and it doesn't work. So what are the repercussions? Well, I would think about what happened to Philippines, Poland, Thailand, Egypt, Pakistan, and Russia. You may not see, well, Putin's been indicted, but again, you may not see indictments of their heads of state for the declaration of martial law. But martial law leads to and facilitates the very kinds of violations for which there are consequences. In each of the countries I've just mentioned, martial law did lead to crimes against humanity or other violations that led to sanctions from the International Criminal Court or sanctions from other countries. Which takes me to my final point around the geopolitical and global politics implications of what happened. Now, the most traditional response to the violations I've mentioned in other countries is sanctions by other countries or by the United Nations. The good news is, at least temporarily, South Korea righted the ship. South Korea showed the power of democratic governance to stand up, at least at that moment, to an autocrat seeking power. So I don't think we're going to see massive sanctions on South Korea. Instead, I think we see a more troubling and longer-lasting challenge, which is South Korea's credibility on the international stage. The U.S.-South Korea alliance, which has been so critical for a long time for South Korea's security and for Asian regional security, under any normal circumstance in the United States, would be under some level of stress today. Where does South Korea fit in the Quad arrangement, which is a group of countries, the US, Japan, India, Australia, and South Korea, the Quad Plus, that was trying to create regional stability and security in the Asia-Pacific region? When I look at that list, at least until recently, I would say those are all strong democracies. Today, I would say that in at least 3 of them, democracy is under threat. When we think about South Korea's relationships with China, I think this shows a kind of crack that the Chinese might be willing to exploit in various ways. A recognition that perhaps South Korean governance is not as strong as we thought. The recognition that there may be ways to peel away allies that are critical to regional security. And so, I think the ultimate test still stands before us. South Korea is today at a both promising and perilous moment. Promising because its immediate response to President Yoon showed the power of its democracy. Perilous because we don't know where that democratic practice will go from here. It's up to the courts, it's up to the institutions of South Korea to show the world that South Korean democracy is stronger than any one individual. But I can't not end by saying this occurs at a moment of extraordinary threat to democracy around the world. A threat here at home, a threat in places across the globe, some of whom are part of the Quad Plus. And I think at a global matter, we're asking today, what does democratic governance mean? It means more certainly than elections. It means more than just respect of basic human rights. It requires a robust and open political system where lawyers and law firms can defend rights, where opposition parties have a voice, where people have a right to stand up without fear. And the eyes of the world today are on South Korea. They may be on us before too long. Thank you.
Thank you. So this kind of end of the panel discussion. So I'd like to big thank you to our presenters for the informative talk. So as you can see that we try to understand this martial law of the South Korea in a broad context of comparative and also international perspective. So Now we'll now open the floor for audience questions. You can direct your question to one of these panelists or to the panel in general. So then, we're trying to respond to your questions as collectively if the questions apply to all of us. I know that the first question is always most, yes, please.
Hi, thank you. So, I could just ask, yeah.
And do you mind introducing yourself just so we know who you are when you ask a question?
I'm Steven. I'm a high schooler from Connecticut, and I'm here for my college tour.
Welcome. We hope you come to Penn.
But thank you for the talk, and I just I just want to ask: do you think this declaration of martial law, was it an isolated incident? Was it like an outburst, or is it kind of evidence that something's happening beneath the surface, that there's greater shifts in democracy? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question.
Steven, yeah.
And congratulations. I think there were some tensions leading up to the martial law, and it speaks to kind of not the legality of the Constitution, but the tensions and the polarization that surrounded it, right? So, for instance, when President Yoon declared the martial law, he did cite reasons such as anti-state threats coming from North Korea. That's, the tensions with North Korea have been there historically. But of course, he didn't provide any details on what those threats entailed. And so it was really not clear if there was any substance to the threat. And most political pundits say that there wasn't, right? And he also detailed how domestic political opponents were creating problems for his administration. And I think that's kind of where the main problem was. So the motivation lay domestically rather than kind of from the external threats, right? And so domestic threats, I think it's really important to understand the current kind of polarization that is happening, not just in Korea, but across the world. And I think because of the polarization, Yoon was prompted to not only declare the martial law, but since then, the South Korean public has been divided on how to interpret the martial law. And I think most people are against it, but at the same time can see that the approval ratings of Yoon has been going up ever since. And so I think, in thinking about what led to it, I think it was still not anticipated by anyone, except for a few people within the National Assembly who did kind of talk about signs of this happening, such as Yoon filling some of the key military official seats with his close allies or close people with people who he attended schools with. And so there were a little bit of signs that this could have happened, but I think no one really anticipated such a drastic measure. But the polarization and kind of this long standoff between the National Assembly and the president, those were key kind of reasons that Yoon cited in declaring it. And what's kind of dangerous is how these tensions are used and the information asymmetry or information differences that these different key players have are used as reasons for these kind of drastic measures. And that's kind of what we're seeing in various places. And perhaps Jane could talk about kind of what we're seeing in the US or in other countries as well. Yeah. So there are striking parallels, I think.
Yeah, I think, as I mentioned, the South Korea case is unusual in that it is quite unforeseen, right? It kind of happened out of nowhere, or seemingly out of nowhere. I do think that that martial law is likely to be a feature of many kind of aspiring autocrats going forward. To an extent, it's happened already in El Salvador with these state of emergencies that Bukele has implemented, and they're quite a common tool. Interestingly, right, martial law is also a tricky thing to declare because it requires the cooperation of the military in general, right? It's not just you can't just enforce martial law because you say it's martial law. There is actually a kind of process behind it. that can leave leaders open to basically facing a military that says no. I think that if it happens in other cases, including in the United States, it will be part of a slower escalation. Traditionally, in these kind of more modern cases, happens when there are massive protests, and the protests are called, protesters are called criminals, and therefore you need the National Guard, the military. So it's unlikely to look exactly like South Korea, but it would not be surprising to me to see a kind of resurgence of martial law.
I think asked and answered.
Okay. So any other questions from others? Yes, the back there.
Hi, my name is Mina. I'm a first-year PhD student in the political science department here. I think my question was more just searching for a bit of clarity behind the narratives supporting the martial law, or why there's this rebound in support. Is this more of a partisan thing where there's citizens are kind of backing the party, or are they coming around to the idea of martial law? Like, what's going on?
Yeah, I think I can answer that question. So I think there's a little bit of both. So unfortunately, I think these reasons that you cited, such as the anti-state threats, resonate with some pockets of Korean society to this day, even though there were really no evidence behind the threats. Another key reason is partisan polarization, and so one thing that we know from South Korea is that Park Geun-hye, the former conservative president, was also impeached. And a lot of lawmakers and politicians who supported the impeachment at the time were outcasted from the party afterwards. And so I think that is one of the reasons why a lot of lawmakers within the PPP are afraid of what might happen if they don't support Yoon in this case. And so there's this big fraction that is going on even within the party. But overall, there is a polarization or partisan polarization that is taking place in South Korea. Another aspect that I think is important to mention is that the opposition party right now is also not very popular. And so a lot of the kind of key reasons why people are against the impeachment is the fear of what's going to happen after, right? So after the impeachment, we're likely to have we will have another election if the impeachment does get passed. And a lot of people are worried about who will get elected in that case. And because of the unpopularity of the opposition leader right now, that's another reason why people are kind of trying to block the impeachment from happening. So, the quick answer to your question is that it's both. Yes.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes, the back there, please.
Thanks for the talk. I'm Luke. I'm also from political science department. So my question is related to this sort of debate in political science literature that we almost never observe rich democracy breakdown throughout the history, right? And people were trying to explain why. Is there something about their sort of the stability, or just I'm pretty sure many of you are familiar with that debate. So I'm just curious whether the South Korean case, right, tells us it's sort of it's conforming, basically that knowledge, that wisdom that rich democracy don't break down, or it's actually making that wisdom sort of you're more stretched now because of the potential of a rich democracy breakdown in South Korea.
So I guess these questions apply to to everyone to some extent. So love to hear if all of.
Yeah, I'll just start by saying I think we're seeing more breakdowns of democracies today than we used to, and there's certain political science wisdom that when at least I was doing my PhD, we learned two countries with McDonald's never go to war with one another, etc. And I look around the world today, and some of those things don't hold. So I do think we're at a moment where we have to question that. I also think, and this is consistent with what you've heard already, that what we tend to see today much more is that a rich democracy becomes a less rich democracy, and democracy begins to sort of weaken. And then once it's weak, then you don't have a rich democracy breaking down in quite the same way, right? It's this, and I think what sets South Korea apart is, again, this sort of moment in time where it looks like democracy is perhaps giving way. The last thing I guess I would say is we still don't know the end of this story. This is still a live story, right? This might end up being one of the great stories of the test of a strong democracy. Rather than indication of democratic weakness, right? Strong democracies do survive challenges that get thrown at them. And weak democracies tend to crumble under that threat.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also worth noting some political or global trends, right? I think scholars talk about the rise of economic inequality and wealth inequality as potentially threatening for liberal democracy. Another threat that we're seeing across the world is information and the media landscape, right? So kind of going back to the earlier question about why we're seeing kind of this big tension between people who support Yoon and people who oppose Yoon is that they're exposed to completely and drastically different types of media environment, right? So a lot of, I think President Yoon even kind of spoke through a YouTube channel to his supporters. And so this kind of media landscape is also another kind of reason why we're seeing these changes. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the post-1945 ideas that we built up in political science are certainly getting tested. You know, the idea of the global order, and we don't yet know how that's going to play out, but I think in some ways it has also been a harmful narrative because it has made people think it can't happen here, that it doesn't happen here, and I think it's important to recognize that it can happen. It is not the case that if there are few democracies that break down that are rich, then no democracy can break down that is rich. I think we are seeing that it can happen just about anywhere.
And I think what's also dangerous is that leaders learn from each other, right, from the past and from the present. So President Yoon, if you look at how the emergency law or the martial law played out, he took a lot of kind of inspiration from previous martial laws that was declared, for instance, from Chun-Doo-Han, right, in 1980. And if you look at leaders across the world, it seems that there is also learning going on between or amongst leaders today. And so that is another aspect to kind of keep in mind. Yeah.
Okay, anyone from outside of political science? Any question? Yes, please.
And if you're from political science, we'll still let you ask.
Okay, now from political science. Hi, my name is Gina. Thank you so much for the panel. I'm the second-year PhD student in the history of science, and my focus is on East Asia during the Cold War. So I apologize for like a half-baked question right now, but throughout this conversation, I feel like we're really talking from a top-down perspective, where we're putting like the nation state as the agent, or like we're thinking about an international audience, and so, but what really stopped martial law starts from a bottom-up scale, where it is people coming out to protest and going out on the streets, which it might have inspired bureaucrats to jump over the fence and kind of like enact political action here. So my question generally has to do with like, who is the audience for martial law? Like for President Yoon, is martial law intended for the audience of the Korean people, for the opposing party? And when it has come to the judgment of the international stage, then not only is Korea under examination here, all of its allies in other countries, their actions are also kind of looked at and scrutinized here at this international stage. So I'm wondering, like, broad audience-related questions, kind of who is the audience for this and who are the actors?
That's a good question, and thank you for asking that. I mean, I think it's so important to acknowledge that protesters and citizens had an enormous role in stopping the martial law, right? they gathered right after the martial law was declared and stayed nights during cold winters in order to make sure that not only the martial law was lifted, but after that, the impeachment would go through. And today, there are still massive protests going on in all over Korea right now. And so we cannot understate the importance of protesters, and not just citizens who came out to protest, but also citizens who were inside the National Assembly building as well. So I have a friend who works in the National Assembly building, and she was telling me how they were blocking the doors so that the troops wouldn't be able to come in and block the lawmakers from casting their votes, right? So it's really important how these citizens were kind of acting in unison to make sure that the martial law was lifted, and especially in South Korea, where protests have such a large history in democratization movements, and I think maybe Hyunjun can also talk about how important protests were. I remember hearing that you were part of the student movement, so maybe you can talk a little bit about that. But for me, it's a personal kind of, it does bring about this like personal feeling. So for me, instance, hearing about this martial law happening and the impeachment, it was, and being overseas, it was really actually really difficult to not be able to take part myself, right? And so I think it is really important to kind of think about this and the historical kind of events that allowed this to continue as well. And I guess like that is one aspect of how we think about South Korea's democratic resilience, right? And so that's a huge important aspect to consider. So thank you for bringing that to this kind of discussion. In terms of who the show was for, or who this was for or intended for, I don't think it was supposed to be a show. So I think President Yoon Suk-yeol actually did mean to become an autocratic ruler, right? And so perhaps you can kind of elaborate more on who you think it was for, but I don't think it was necessarily for an international audience. It was really for himself and his power. But perhaps Jun can talk about kind of the protests and the significance of protests.
Yeah, so, I mean, before answering that question, I'd like to open up a little bit of related question. I mean, Jane and Bill, you already talked about like a comparative and international perspective, but still, I think it would be nice to hear a little bit more about like what really you think is really unique, or what is like a really, like something that you didn't expect actually, when these things happens in South Korea. So love to hear. I mean, that's what I think the Gina's questions about this international, the view, maybe somehow touch upon those, the issues. So if there's anything that you'd like to add more about what you already mentioned about, sometimes this martial law, some other country took actually very gradually, but it actually, happens very quickly, and also, the collapse very quickly, which, obviously the military didn't cooperate with the President Yoon. So there's lots of different things, but still, within this quick framework of comparative politics or international law, there's something that very unique, or is something that international audience should actually pay more attention to, because it may actually generate some possible trajectory that can happen to other countries that, in the coming years. So I'm just curious about, and love to hear more about what those might be, from your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think that what we saw in South Korea is unusual, and that is, I think, one of the reasons that we got this international audience, that, many people who, live in the West, who do not have a connection to South Korea, really weren't paying too much attention to the fact that polarization had increased so much in South Korea. There was still this sense that it was the kind of, like quiet, stable kind of centerpiece of democracy, right? And I think that the martial law was a shock to the system, because suddenly it was showing that there were these deep fissions. But But I think that in some ways, Yoon is, well, Yoon's going to have a second chance, right? He's going to, if he avoids impeachment and his party do not reject him, he didn't really create enough of a narrative. He didn't necessarily create enough of a kind of audience for what he was doing. There is often a justification. It's communists, or it's terrorists, or it's gang leaders, right? It's corrupt officials, whatever, right? Soros mercenaries. And he didn't quite have the strength of that narrative that had been built up through time, and that I think often offers a bit more of a warning signal. But I think it does show that when you have these hyperpolarized democracies, this is something that they are vulnerable to, right? If people can't agree that rule by the other side is acceptable to them, then this is the sort of thing that can happen.
Yeah. One of the interesting questions for me here is, why did this martial law invocation fail? And I think there's some lessons to be learned from that for other countries. The first is the story you just explained, which is the narrative wasn't very compelling. The second is that communication was still open and free. There was the ability for an opposition movement and people to find out what happened and to respond to it very quickly through open and free communication. Third, individuals were not yet too scared to act, right? People went out on the street, obviously risking their lives, but I think most of them assumed that the guns were not going to have live fire ammunition shot at them. And in some ways, my point is that Yoon just did this poorly. If he really wanted to succeed, it wouldn't have been that hard to do. It might have taken a little bit longer, but first you had to build the narrative of the threat. Then you had to crack down on media and communications and shut down those communication channels. And finally, you just had to make people a little more scared so that they weren't willing to be the ones who were going to go out and stand guard at the National Assembly. And it doesn't take much for somebody to say it's too risky. I'll let somebody else do it. And they're not to be a somebody else. So I say this because I think as we're looking at other countries and what they can learn, I hope that there aren't too many, aspiring autocrats who learn the lessons I just stated, but they're not that hard to see. And I also think when somebody asks, is this an anomaly or not? Yes, it's an anomaly in that the imposition of martial law preceded the breakdown of institutions that would protect against it and therefore failed. But if you reverse order the engineering of this and do the breakdown of institutions, communication, and a little more threats to people first, then martial law probably would have succeeded. And so I think there's a really important lesson there. And in response to one of the questions, I think the other takeaway for me is that most people in the foreign policy sort of elite establishment, but who were not experts on South Korean governance, never saw this coming. And I think there's some important lessons there for State Department officials and foreign ministries around the world of saying, you put countries into buckets where you don't think there's issues to be worried about. And South Korea had graduated from 1980, when it was in the bucket of democracy at risk, to highly stable democracy that you can count on. And nobody thought further about it once it made that graduation to that category. And I think both for academics and for foreign policy practitioners, this is a reminder that, this can happen. It happened in South Korea. Could it happen in France, another highly polarized society? I'm not saying it can't, right? And so I think that's a lesson that we need to bear in mind outside of the South Korea context.
Thank you. I see that it's time to close, but let me actually ask one last question to the panelists, if there's no question from the floor, because I think one important issue is about what we do now, rather than what happened, not only what happened until now, because how do we strengthen democracy, especially how do we really enhance people's participation in this process? Because I think even if we elect the presidents, that's what happens. The elected presidents can actually, declare the martial law, without really consultation with the people's and, the opposition party. So I think how can we enhance this democracy? I think that's kind of the homework that we, that from for all of us. So I'd love to hear just 1 minute brief, your view about what could be the important actually next step for the Korean democracy to go more broadly, the democracy in the world.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think it's a very difficult question that I think the world is grappling with today. For South Korea, what is striking is that the constitution did have means of stopping it. So he was supposed to get, or Yoon was supposed to get approval from both the state council and was supposed to communicate the martial law with the National Assembly before declaring it. He didn't, so he just completely denied and ignored the Constitution, right? And that's kind of what we're seeing in the United States, for instance, right? And so there were means to protect the democracy, but it didn't stop Yoon from ignoring those sanctions. Another important aspect that I wanted to mention is that in South Korea, the president holds an enormous amount of power, and that's one of the reasons why we were able to kind of see this happen, right? And this imperial presidency is an issue that scholars have continued to criticize, but politically it's a very difficult situation to change, and perhaps this could spark more debates regarding whether this presidential system is viable or it should be changed for a more maybe parliamentary system or the like. Yeah.
Well, I wish I knew. I would say that there are certain things that I think a lot of it is going to have to come from individuals making small, meaningless actions that stack up into something that's a little bit bigger than small, meaningless actions, right? You keep pressure going through protests, through writing legislators. You say what you think and what is going on in as clear terms as you can to everybody that you know. And you run for office, right? I think that one of the parts that I have struggled with the most is that we have this normative ideal of democracy, but it is also the case that democracy has in many ways failed to provide for people in need, right? And so how do we actually fix that and how do we solve it? I think part of it is a representation crisis. Part of it is that there are certain systems to get people elected that are not necessarily the people that we would most want to be elected, most want to represent us. And so it also requires, when you do have a stable democracy, or if we have it again, right, how do you actually create a system where people feel that they are heard and engaged and like there is forward momentum? And that's a kind of longer term question.
Both the answers have sort of looked from within. I'm going to look from the outside. What can we do as a global community? And my first answer is to say academic research and history has helped us really figure out what we do to help fragile new democracies or countries transition into democracy. We got a lot wrong at the end of the Cold War, but we also learned some lessons. And things like what USAID has been doing or the National Democratic Institute has been doing for the last 30 years are at the core of that. So the first thing you do is you don't stop all of those things. Secondly, I think we need to do more research and thinking about how do we help what appear to be stronger democracies avoid backsliding. And I think that is one that academic literature hasn't really answered, and therefore we don't have the strategies in place to deploy them. To me, a piece of it has to be leadership by example and exclusive clubs. What do I mean by that? You need a president to say, wait a minute, if I take this action, it is going to actually hurt me. I am not going to be invited into the Quad. I am not going to have the alliances I need for my security. I'm not going to have the trade benefits that come with membership in various regional trading organizations. And so figuring out how to set those incentives right is really hard at a moment where if you're a leader today and you look around and say, who are my role models for governance? Well, Vladimir Putin looks good, Xi Jinping looks good, the list could go on.
All right. Sadly, it's time for us to conclude today's program. So please join me in thanking our panelists. To see a replay of today's lectures or any other talk from the Library of Lectures, visit us on the Penn Arts and Science website or the Penn Arts and Science and BMO Library. Thanks to all of you for coming to today's Knowledge by the Slice. I hope to see you again in other events. Thank you.